This is my true story. I built a house with my own hands, thinking my family would care for me in my old age. I thought love would grow stronger with time. But instead, I was pushed aside, treated as nothing, and finally locked in the basement of my own home. I was left without food, without light, and left to starve. I thought my life would end there, in the darkness. But then, one voice outside changed everything. Before I tell you how, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe. All my life I worked with one purpose: to give my family a life better than mine. From the time I was a young man, my body belonged to labor. I woke before sunrise, went out when the air was still cold, and worked until the last bit of light left the sky. My hands were cut, my back bent, my legs tired, but I never stopped. Every day I told myself it was worth it. Each brick I laid, each wall I raised, each corner I painted was not just a house. It was a promise. A promise that my children would never live without a roof. I remember the first day I stepped into that house after finishing it. The floor smelled of wood, the walls fresh with paint, and though it was simple, it was strong. I built it brick by brick, saving every coin to buy the land, saving every coin to purchase the materials. I gave up food, I gave up rest, I gave up comfort, but when I stood there with the keys in my hand, I felt proud. Not proud of myself, but proud that my children would have something I never did: stability. When my children were small, I worked 2 jobs at once. During the day, I worked outside to earn money. At night, I worked in the workshop, repairing, fixing, building anything neighbors asked, just to earn more. There were nights when my wife told me to rest, but I couldn't. I looked at my children's faces, and I knew rest was a luxury I could not afford. Hunger was never for them. It was for me. I skipped meals, I patched old clothes, I wore shoes with holes, just so they could go to school with heads held high. Every paycheck I brought home went to them. Food on the table, books for their studies, clothes for their growing bodies. And when the house needed something, a roof fixed, a wall painted, a floor repaired, I did it with my own hands. I poured every ounce of sweat into making sure the home was safe, strong, and filled with warmth. Not for me, but for them. As the years passed, I believed I had succeeded. I watched my children grow in that house, safe from storms, safe from hunger, safe from the struggles I once knew. I watched them eat until their stomachs were full while I sat quietly with half a plate. I watched them sleep soundly while I lay awake worrying about the next bill. I told myself, this is what fathers do. We give until nothing is left. And I gave everything. I thought old age would be my reward. I thought when my hair turned white and my hands grew weak, I would finally be able to rest in the home I had built. I thought my children would sit with me, listen to me, care for me the way I once cared for them. I believed love does not fade with time. It grows. I believed sacrifice would not be forgotten. It would be honored. Every time I fixed a leak, every time I painted over cracks, every time I added something new to the house, I told myself, this is not for me. This is for them. One day, they will understand. And with every year, I grew older, but my faith stayed the same. I did not doubt them. I did not think they would betray me. My whole life, I lived with one truth. Family is everything. But I was wrong. The house I built with my own hands, the house I filled with years of sacrifice, became my prison. The children I raised with my hunger, the children I clothed with my torn shirts, the children I carried through storms, they turned against me. They forgot the sweat, the pain, the sacrifices. They forgot the father who had given everything. They saw only an old man. And in their eyes, I was no longer love. I was no longer respect. I was no longer even human. I believed old age would bring care, but instead, it brought cruelty. The first signs came slowly, like cracks in a wall that no one notices at first. At the beginning, I told myself it was nothing. I told myself maybe they were busy, maybe they were tired, maybe they just forgot. But deep inside, I began to feel the change. The respect that once lived in their voices was fading. The warmth in their eyes was growing cold. They no longer looked at me as a father. They began to look at me as a weight. It started with meals. In the past, they would always call me to the table. Even if the food was small, they made sure I had a plate. But then, slowly, my plate became smaller. Sometimes they said there wasn't enough. Sometimes they told me I had already eaten when I hadn't. I sat quietly, drinking water while they ate full plates, telling myself maybe they forgot, maybe it was just a mistake. But mistakes became habit. Soon, there were nights when no one called me at all. I sat in my room, waiting, listening to the sound of dishes clattering and laughter at the table while my stomach burned with hunger. Then came the words. At first, small comments. You're slow. You forget too much. You don't help anymore. They said it with laughter, as if it was a joke. But I knew it wasn't. Each word cut me, but I lowered my eyes and stayed silent. I told myself not to complain. I told myself to endure. I told myself love would return if I stayed patient. But respect was gone. Soon, they spoke to me not as a father, but as a servant. They ordered me to do small chores, not because they needed me, but because they wanted me to know my place. If I refused, they called me lazy. If I tried, they said I was slow. No matter what I did, it was wrong. I went from being the man who built the house to the man who was in the way inside the house. I felt myself shrinking. I stopped sitting at the main table. I stopped speaking during family talks. I stopped reminding them of the sacrifices I made because I knew they did not want to hear it. My voice, once strong in this home, became a whisper. My presence, once needed, became a burden. The hardest part was not the hunger or the chores. The hardest part was watching the love vanish from their eyes. A father does not need riches in old age. A father does not need gifts. A father only needs love. But that was the one thing they refused to give. They gave me food like charity when they remembered. They gave me orders like I was a stranger. But they gave me no love, no respect, no kindness. I lay awake many nights, staring at the ceiling, asking myself where I went wrong. Did I not give enough? Did I give too much? Did I raise them in a way that made them blind to sacrifice? I did not have answers. I only had silence. And in that silence, I began to understand that the neglect was not an accident. It was a choice. The family I built, the family I fed, the family I clothed, the family I gave my house to, they had begun to erase me from my own life. The day it happened is one I can never forget. I woke up that morning weak, but hopeful that maybe things would be different. Maybe they would remember I was their father. Maybe they would sit with me, share food with me, and speak kindly. But instead, that day became the cruelest of my life. I was sitting quietly in the corner of the house when they began whispering. Their eyes glanced at me as if I were a burden that needed to be moved. I could hear their words, even when they thought I could not. They said I ate too much, that I was useless, that keeping me alive was a waste. My heart sank with every word. These were my children, the same children I had starved for, worked for, suffered for. And now they were saying I did not deserve even food. By afternoon they called me. Their voices were sharp, not warm. They told me to follow. I obeyed. Because what else could I do? I followed them down the stairs into the basement, a place cold, damp, filled with dust and shadows. My heart felt heavy, but I kept walking, trusting that maybe it was only for some chore, some reason. But I was wrong. When I reached the bottom, they pushed me inside and closed the door. The sound of the lock clicked, and it echoed in my ears like thunder. I tried to open it, but it was sealed. I knocked, I called, but their voices came from the other side. Cold, cruel voices. They said, "You don't need to eat much anyway. You're old." And then silence. I stood in that dark room, staring at the locked door, my hands shaking. I could not believe it. My own family, in my own house, had locked me away like an animal. I looked around. No chair, no food, no water, no light. Only darkness, only dust, only cold. Hours passed, and my stomach growled louder than ever before. I pressed my hand against my belly, remembering the years I worked 2 jobs just to make sure my children never went to bed hungry. I thought of the nights I walked home with an empty stomach, only to see them eating happily at the table. I had always told myself it was worth it, that a father's hunger was nothing if his children were full. But now, those same children had left me to starve. The darkness grew heavier as the hours stretched into a day. My body weakened, my throat dry, my head dizzy. I knocked again, hoping maybe they would change their minds, maybe they would bring food, maybe they would remember I was still their father. But no one came. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. That basement was built by my hands. I had laid its foundation, carried the stone, sealed the walls. I built it strong so my family would always have safety. And yet, that same basement became my prison. That same safety became my suffering. The house I built for love had turned against me, and the people I built it for had turned cruel. As I sat in the dark, my back against the cold wall, I felt tears slide down my cheeks. Not tears for myself, but tears for the love that had been lost. I realized then that I was no longer their father. To them, I was nothing more than a burden to be hidden, a mouth to silence, a man to erase. And there, in the basement of my own house, left without food, without water, without dignity, I faced the cruelest truth of all. My sacrifices had been forgotten. I sat in that basement with nothing but darkness around me. The air was damp, the walls cold, and the floor hard beneath me. My stomach growled like an empty drum, each sound reminding me that I had been forgotten. I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes, but sleep did not come. Hunger kept me awake, thirst kept my lips dry, and pain kept my body restless. I tried to stay strong, but each hour felt heavier than the last. In the silence, memories came flooding back. I remembered nights when I worked 2 jobs so my children would never know hunger. I remembered walking home in the freezing cold, hands numb, but carrying bread for them to eat. I remembered eating less so they could eat more, giving them the best portion while I swallowed the scraps. I thought those sacrifices had meaning. I thought they would remember. But in that basement, I realized those memories lived only in me. For them, those years had vanished. The hunger grew sharper with every passing hour. My hands shook, my legs weak, my head spinning. I leaned forward, clutching my stomach, praying for strength. The sound of footsteps above me came now and then, but none stopped at the door. They lived their lives upstairs, eating, laughing, sleeping, while I wasted away beneath them. The house echoed with their voices, but to me, it was as if I no longer existed. I looked around in the dim light that crept through a crack. Cobwebs hung in the corners, dust covered the floor, and old boxes sat forgotten. I thought to myself, am I also just another forgotten thing? Once useful, now locked away, hidden in the dark. My chest tightened with the weight of that thought. A father, once strong enough to build this house with his hands, now abandoned inside it like a broken tool. The worst pain was not hunger. It was the memory of love. I remembered the way they once held my hands as children, looking at me with eyes full of trust. I remembered the joy of hearing them call me father with voices soft and sweet. I remembered their smiles at the table, their laughter in the yard. And now, those same voices had told me I was old, useless, unworthy of food. Those same children had turned my sacrifices into nothing. I wept silently, wiping my tears on my sleeve, ashamed even though no one could see me. My pride was gone, my dignity crushed, my body growing weaker by the hour. But inside, a small flame refused to die. I told myself, I will not let this be my end. If I was meant to suffer, then I would suffer with strength. If they wanted me to disappear, I would still endure. As I sat there, my thoughts drifted again to the nights long ago when I gave up everything for them. The nights when I carried food through storms. The nights when I worked until my hands bled. The nights when I stood tall, even as the world bent me down. And I asked myself, how could love turn to cruelty so quickly? How could sacrifice be forgotten so easily? But in that dark basement, I had no answers. Only hunger, only thirst, only silence. And yet, I clung to a single hope that someone, somewhere, would see what was happening. That someone outside these walls would notice I was gone. That someone would care enough to ask. Days passed in the darkness, and I felt myself sinking deeper into weakness. My body was thin, my lips cracked, my voice barely a whisper. I thought maybe this was how my story would end. Starving in the very house I built, forgotten by the family I sacrificed for. But even as I sat there, broken and alone, something was happening outside those walls that I could not see. Hope was moving quietly, and it wore the face of a neighbor. This neighbor had seen me many times before. He watched me sweep the porch in the early mornings, water the small garden, or sit on the bench outside with tired eyes but a steady heart. He knew my routine, knew I was a man who never hid indoors for long. And when he realized he hadn't seen me in days, he grew concerned. To him, it was not like me to vanish. To him, silence meant something was wrong. One afternoon, while I sat in the basement with my back against the cold wall, I heard faint knocking from above. My ears strained. The sound was soft but clear. Someone was at the door. I listened harder, my heart beating faster. A voice followed. Not the harsh voices of my family, but a different one. Calm, firm, and questioning. It was my neighbor. He asked where I was, why he hadn't seen me, if I was all right. I held my breath in the basement. My lips moved to answer, but no sound came out. My family responded instead. I could hear them through the floor, their voices sharp and cold. They told him I was fine, just resting. They said I was old and needed more sleep, that there was nothing to worry about. Their words were smooth, but their tone carried lies. The neighbor did not leave right away. He pressed again, asking to see me, asking why I had not stepped outside. My heart lifted slightly. For the first time in days, I felt noticed. Someone remembered me. Someone asked about me. But then I heard the door close hard. They had turned him away. The house grew quiet again. I sat in the basement, my chest heavy. For a moment, I thought hope had left as quickly as it came. But then I remembered the sound of his voice. Concerned, steady, suspicious. A voice that did not believe their lies. And in that memory, I found a thin thread of strength. The neighbor's suspicion grew stronger with each day he did not see me. He watched the house carefully. He noticed the curtains drawn, the silence too heavy, the way my family's answers grew shorter whenever he asked about me. His eyes saw what others ignored. His heart felt what others denied. And though I did not know it at the time, he was already preparing to do more. As I sat starving in the dark, I prayed in silence. I prayed that the outside world would not forget me the way my family had. I prayed that the sound of that knock would not be the last. And though my body was weak, my hope began to whisper to me, "You are not fully alone. Someone has seen you. Someone cares." The day the call was made was the day my fate began to change. I did not see it, but I would later learn how it happened. My neighbor, the one who had knocked and been turned away, could not silence his thoughts. He told himself something was wrong. He had lived near me long enough to know my habits, my ways, my presence. He knew I was not a man to vanish without reason. Each day that passed without me outside was proof that something dark was happening inside that house. He knocked again, but once more my family met him with cold words. They said I was fine, said I was too weak to come to the door, said I needed rest. But their voices carried no warmth, only irritation. He saw through them. He told himself no father should be hidden away like that. No father should be invisible in the very home he built. And so, when they shut the door in his face, he made a decision. He reached for his phone and called for help. That call became the turning point. He spoke to the authorities, his voice steady but filled with concern. He told them he had not seen me for days. He told them the family's answers did not feel right. He told them something was wrong, something hidden, something cruel. He did not have proof, but he had faith that his instincts were true, and that faith was stronger than their lies. I sat in the basement that day, weak and dizzy, unaware of what was happening above. My stomach groaned, My throat was dry, my body was trembling from hunger. I thought my days were numbered. I thought no one would ever know the truth of where I was. But while I sat in darkness, a light was moving toward me, carried through a phone call made by someone who still had compassion in his heart. The family upstairs carried on as usual. They thought their secret was safe. They thought their cruelty would never be known. They laughed, they ate, they slept, while I starved below them. But outside, the seeds of exposure were already planted. My neighbor had set them in motion with one brave call. That night I heard voices outside the house, at first faint, then stronger. The sound of footsteps, the knock on the door louder this time. My family went to answer, their tone sharper than ever. But the voices on the other side were not neighbors, not relatives. They were the voices of authority. Calm, firm, unshaken. They demanded to see me. I pressed my ear to the basement door. My heart pounded. I could not believe what I was hearing. Someone had come. Someone had asked for me. Someone was refusing to take lies as answers. My chest filled with a trembling hope, fragile but alive. And though I could not see their faces yet, I knew this truth. The call had been made, and the silence that chained me was about to be broken. The sound of the knock grew louder that night, and this time it was not the knock of a kind neighbor. It was the knock of authority, sharp and commanding, the kind that makes doors tremble. I sat in the basement, my body weak, my stomach hollow, my lips cracked from thirst, but my ears were alert. I heard voices upstairs, firm, unyielding voices, demanding answers. My family tried to resist, tried to cover their cruelty with smooth lies. They said I was asleep, too tired to meet anyone. They said I was unwell but resting. But the voices outside did not believe them. They pressed harder, demanding proof. I heard the sound of footsteps moving across the floor, the hesitation in my family's voices, the way the air shifted with fear. Then came the sound that shook me to my bones, the turning of the basement lock. For days, I had heard only silence at that door. Now the lock was moving. My heart raced, my weak body trembling with both fear and hope. The door creaked open, and a sliver of light pierced the darkness. The authorities stepped in. Flashlights cut through the gloom, landing on me where I sat hunched in the corner. My clothes were dirty, my body thin, my face pale. I tried to stand but could not. My legs gave way beneath me, and I collapsed against the wall. Gasps filled the room. One voice, sharp with shock, said, "He's starving." Another voice said, "How could they leave him like this?" I lowered my head, ashamed. Ashamed not because of what I had done, but because I had been reduced to this in the very home I had built. I could not meet their eyes. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths as they stepped closer, offering water, offering support. Their hands were steady, lifting me gently, their voices soft now, filled with care. Behind them, my family stood frozen. I could not see their faces clearly, but I could feel their fear. Their lies had crumbled. Their secret was shattered. They had been exposed by the very people they thought would never look inside. As the officers helped me out of the basement, I felt the first breath of fresh air on my skin. The light from the house above blinded me, but it was a light I had longed for. My body was weak, but my spirit lifted as I realized I was no longer trapped. The door that once locked me in had been forced open, and with it, the truth had been forced out. The rescue was not loud for me. It was quiet. Quiet steps carrying me out of the basement. Quiet hands giving me water to drink. Quiet voices telling me I was safe now. But inside, my heart roared with relief. I had survived the darkness. I had survived the hunger. And now, I was seen again. I did not speak many words that night. I did not accuse. I did not cry out. I simply lowered my head, letting them see the truth written on my body, thin, trembling, starving. That was enough. My suffering spoke louder than my voice ever could. When they carried me out of the basement, the truth could no longer be hidden. The light from the doorway fell across my thin frame, my sunken cheeks, my trembling hands. Neighbors had gathered outside, drawn by the noise, and their eyes widened at the sight of me. Whispers spread like fire. Some gasped, some covered their mouths, some shook their heads in disbelief. They had known me as the man who built that house, the man who once stood tall in the community. Now they saw me broken, starved, humiliated in my own home. The authorities questioned my family, but their words crumbled quickly. They tried to excuse themselves, saying I refused food, saying I preferred the basement, saying I was too old to come upstairs. Lies rolled off their tongues, but none of them stuck. The crowd outside had already seen enough. My weak body told the truth more clearly than any voice could. My hollow eyes, my dry lips, my dirty clothes, they revealed every cruel choice my family had made. Relatives arrived soon after, faces pale with shock. Some of them asked how this could happen. Some asked why no one had noticed sooner. But the shame was no longer mine to carry. It was theirs. The family who once carried our name with pride now stood exposed, their cruelty laid bare for all to see. Their heads lowered, but it was too late. The damage was done. Their reputation was ruined. I sat quietly as officials recorded details, as neighbors murmured, as relatives shook their heads. I did not need to speak much. I only said a few words when they asked me how long I had been down there, how many days I had gone without food. My voice was weak, but every word was enough to crush the excuses my family tried to give. The community turned cold toward them immediately. Friends who once visited stopped coming. Neighbors who once greeted them now looked away. Whispers followed them wherever they went. Words like cruel, heartless, ungrateful. The family who laughed at my pain now lived under the weight of disgrace. And me? For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of strength. Not in my body, but in my spirit. The truth had come into the light. The suffering I endured in silence was no longer hidden in the dark. The humiliation I carried alone was now shared by those who caused it. They wanted me invisible, locked away, forgotten. But instead, their cruelty had been dragged into the open for everyone to see. I lowered my head that day, not from shame, but from release. The burden was no longer mine. It was theirs. After that day, nothing was the same. The basement door that once locked me in was never closed again, but I never stepped back into it. The authorities made sure I was taken out of that house, away from the cruelty that had starved me, away from the family that had forgotten the meaning of love. I was given food, warm blankets, and a place to rest. My body was still weak, my hands still shaking, but for the first time in weeks, I tasted bread without fear. Each bite reminded me that I was still alive, that I had survived what was meant to destroy me. The neighbors who once only waved from afar now stepped forward. They brought meals, asked about my health, and showed me kindness I had not seen from my own blood in years. Their faces carried sorrow when they looked at me, but also respect. Respect that I had endured, respect that I was still standing, even after such cruelty. They told me I deserved better, and though my heart was heavy, I believed them. For once, I let myself believe I was worthy of care. My family, on the other hand, could not escape the shadow of what they had done. Their names became whispers of disgrace in the community. Relatives who once spoke proudly of them now turned away. Neighbors who once greeted them now crossed the street to avoid them. Everywhere they went, they carried the weight of exposure. They tried to defend themselves, but no one listened. The truth was too strong. The sight of me, frail and starving, was burned into everyone's memory. Inside the house, their laughter died. Their pride vanished. Their silence became heavier than mine once was. They had once locked me away to hide their shame of me. But now they lived as prisoners of their own shame. No door could close them off from the eyes of the world. No lock could protect them from the truth. As for me, the authorities arranged for me to live apart from them. I was given a small place to stay, safe and simple, where I could rest without fear. Each morning, I woke to light through the window, not darkness through a crack in the basement wall. Each night, I ate a meal at my own table, not hunger in the cold. It was not luxury, but it was peace, and peace was all I wanted. I thought often of the basement, of the hunger, of the silence. I thought of the nights I pressed my hand to my stomach, remembering the years I gave up my own meals so my children would never starve. I thought of how easily they erased those memories, how quickly they turned against me. But then I reminded myself, the truth had caught them. They could no longer pretend. They could no longer hide. Their cruelty had been dragged into the light, and it had burned them more than it ever burned me. The aftermath was not just their shame. It was my freedom. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer locked away. I was no longer starving in silence. I was a man who had survived, and the world now knew the truth of what I endured. In the end, justice did not come from me raising my voice. Justice did not come from anger or from revenge, or from me trying to fight with my weak hands. Justice came from the truth, and the truth came from outside, from a neighbor who cared enough to knock, to question, to call for help when no one else would. The same family that tried to bury me in silence, that tried to erase me in darkness, could not bury the eyes of the world. They forgot one thing. Cruelty may hide for a while, but it cannot hide forever. Now, I live my last days with dignity. I sit at a small table, and when I place food on my plate, I eat slowly, not rushing, not fearing it will be taken away. Every bite feels like a victory, not over them, but over the silence they tried to trap me in. I drink water and remember the thirst in that basement, and I thank God that I am free from it. I sleep in a bed by a window, and when the morning light touches my face, I remember the darkness I once lived in, and I whisper to myself, never again. My family lives with shame now. Their names are spoken not with respect, but with disgust. Neighbors remind them of what they did. Relatives shake their heads when they pass. They walk with lowered eyes because the truth will always follow them. They tried to strip me of my dignity, but in the end, it is they who lost theirs. They carry disgrace every day, while I carry peace. That is justice. I never returned to their house. The house I built with my own sweat no longer belongs to me, not in body, but in spirit. It will never belong to them either. They may live inside its walls, but they live there like shadows, knowing the community sees them for what they are. I do not need that house anymore. My dignity is my home now. My peace is my shelter. Sometimes I sit quietly and think of my wife. May her soul rest. I imagine her looking down, seeing the truth revealed. I believe she would be proud that I endured, that I did not let their cruelty destroy me. She would be proud that the truth came to light, that I lived to see justice. That thought comforts me more than anything. In the end, I do not wish them harm. I do not wish them hunger or pain. They already live with a punishment worse than any suffering I could give. Exposure. They wanted to hide me, but instead, they exposed themselves. Their cruelty became their curse. Their name, once proud, is now stained forever. And me? I live each day as a free man, a man who knows the value of dignity, a man who has felt the weight of darkness and the relief of light. My story is not one of revenge. It is one of survival. It is one of truth. It is one of justice. My final thought is simple. They left me to starve in the dark, but the truth fed me and exposed them.